Okay, we're back. We're in Discovery, class number 5. This is part 2. We're in the big book and we're in page 283. Now we're going to start looking at the henchman that keeps rejection on the throne of our heart. Okay, I'm just going to move through this book and we're going to kind of go over it together. And so are you all ready? Page 283 in the big book. Okay, so I'm going to start by reading the story that I just found it online, but it has a lot of the good elements that I want you to see about how rejection comes down through the family line. Anna writes, when I was still in my mother's womb, my father told my mother repeatedly that I was not his child. He accused her of sleeping with someone else because, in his opinion, he couldn't have children. It didn't matter to him that I had his eyes, his mouth, and his mannerisms. As far as he was still concerned, I am not his child. People would say, you look like your mother, but when I showed them the picture of my father, they go, oh yeah, you look like your dad. Throughout my life, I've been fearful, full of worry, guilt, and anxiety. I had a poor self-image and felt hopeless, defenseless, and distrustful. I always knew I was different. I didn't fit in, and I gravitated toward being alone, reading, writing, and watching TV. I knew something was wrong with me. After a fight with my mother one day, I cried out to God, what is wrong with me? And I had asked this question to him many times before, but this time he led me to read materials on the root of rejection. I mentally checked off the symptoms I had in my head. Looking over the list, a light bulb went off in my head. That's it. That's why I am the way that I am. I learned that a root of rejection can take place in the womb from fathers and or mothers who did not want the baby. And so that was me. I felt that I was being rejected at every turn in my relationships with my parents, relationships with friends and boyfriends. At some point, right after one of my former boyfriends broke up with me, I just shut down. I made a decision unconsciously that I was going to reject people before they could reject me. I became a recluse, not wanting to be involved with people, not at church, not at school, not at work, not in life. But one day I looked up and realized I had no relationships to show for my life. I was alone, and although I was fine being by myself, I didn't want to spend the rest of my life like this. The root of rejection had taken over my life, and it's been my constant companion, and I felt God urging me that it was time to let go and deal with it. Rejection is a form of unbelief, because rejection says that you are not accepted by God. And in order to be accepted by God, you have to be accepted by man first. There's the lie. I'm going to say it again. Rejection is a form of unbelief because rejection will tell you you're rejected by God and that man has to accept you before God can. And in that sets man as your God, because you allow man to declare who you are and who you are not, determining your identity. So is there a person or a group of people that you really desire their acceptance? Do you believe that they accept you? Do you find yourself behaving in certain ways around certain people? Is there a particular group of people that you have to be accepted by? Do you feel accepted by them when you fail? So many of us can spend up to 80% of our time preparing to be rejected and convincing ourselves that we are rejected. Do you feel this statement is true of you? Rejection as a verb means to cast from one, to throw away, to refuse, to put aside. Rejection as a noun is a person or thing rejected because it doesn't meet some kind of standard. It's the agony of desperately wanting people to love you but convinced that they don't. It will drive you from the very thing you need, which is love. Feeling rejected while someone else loves on you is how this spirit works. It refuses the good and responds to the evil in others. And so what are some of the sources? We went over this in The Broken Heart, but I'm just going to skip over them quickly. Growing up without a father creates a lack of identity. Conceived out of wedlock. Parents didn't want the child. Adoption. Parent wanted a different gender, so it's rejecting you. Sibling rivalry or parent jealousy in parents. Like you may have a parent that really likes one of the children, and even the other parent gets jealous of that. In birth order, the second or middle child battles rejection. One of the parents die or is very sick while you're young. That's a form of abandonment. Okay, so what are rejection's henchmen? What are the underlings? What are the lesser spirits that we listen to and agree with that keeps rejection so strong in our heart? Well, first of all, it's abandonment and fear of abandonment. The door point can be rejection in the womb, where the parents didn't want the child, or there's no father in the home. You're raised by a mom or dad who was emotionally absent. They weren't nurturing. They didn't hold you. They didn't appreciate you, care about you, talk to you. They just weren't available. Another spirit that'll talk to you is accusation by others. You feel accused as being the problem. People think you have unusual or foolish ideas. Self-accusation. You believe you can't do things right. There's something wrong with you. Rejection by others, whether real or imagined. You imagine scenarios in your head. We do this all the time. Scenarios in our head of what we think is going to happen and how people are going to reject us. And what does that do? You start projecting that out, and you create your own self-fulfilling prophecy there. About 60% of rejection you feel is imagined in your mind because of what a spirit is projecting scenarios on what could happen. I want you to think about that. 60% of the rejection you feel is just imagined. The enemy will, that's why the word says to cast down imaginations that exalt itself against the knowledge of God. Are you rejected? No, but the enemy works hard, tirelessly, relentlessly to create images in your mind where you feel like you're being rejected. And then, and most of it never even happens. But it deeply roots you in it because you meditate on it and you imagine it and you go over it and over it and over it again. Stop it. These spirits cause you to always be looking around and compare yourself with others. They will not let you be satisfied, especially in your appearance. This spirit works with self-accusation, and you are already rejected before you even come in contact with people. Self-rejection. Do you struggle with feeling accepted by God and others? Fear of rejection. You overcompensate and strive to be loved and accepted. You feel like there's never enough love. It's a constant void. Rejection of others. You're rejecting someone else. Fear of man, fear of rejection. You avoid situations because you're afraid you'll be hurt again. False burden bearing, false responsibility. You like to spend lots of time with people with lots of problems. I used to do this big time. You keep talking about the problem with no resolution. When you have rejection, you identify with the problems of others. This is what creates massive pity parties. You're gathering around the problem with no solution, not looking at what is behind the problem. Bearing someone's burdens is to lift it off of them. False burden bearing is trying to come alongside them and help them carry the burden. So I used to do this all the time because I didn't have any resolution. I didn't know how to resolve it. And I got a big part of my identity was just being able to connect with these people and think that I could help them. I don't do this anymore. In fact, I've gotten to the point that I work with people for a while, but if they're stuck in self-pity and this false and these kinds of, and they won't come out of it, I mean, they're just not teachable. You just know when they're ready, okay? There's just nothing I can do. It's heartbreaking, but there's just nothing I can do. They have to come out of agreement with it. They have to see that they are one with these spirits. Insecurity, you feel intimidated. You struggle with doubt and unbelief. Self-pity, nobody cares about you. You're the suffering hero. Nobody gets you. Depression, oppression, this is a root of rejection and spirit of heaviness. Depression is anger turned inward. So if you wake up depressed and stay that way for days, go to God and ask him what you're angry about and why. He'll show you. This puts your dependence on God the Father and builds your trust with him. You can recognize how faithful he is to answer and see how much he cares about you. Otherwise, you'll be okay one minute and devastated the next, back and forth and back and forth. And there's the oppression part. Rebellion, rejection always spawns rebellion. Where you see rebellion, you see rejection. Rebellion is always present, and it is like witchcraft. It's 1 Samuel 15. Witchcraft can control. It involves self-will and self-idolatry, and you're looking to yourself to make all the decisions of your life, not God. You're going to the lesser you rather than the greater God. You're going to establish your kingdom, but you get really fearful about it. Then you get possessive with your time, your friends, and you start manipulating situations to stay in control over everything. You will control others before they control you. It's self-preservation, and it causes you to be introverted, always looking at you. Then you become ungrateful and unsatisfied. It's hard to be grateful when you feel like the world is against you. Okay? Defense mechanisms. You withdraw like a shell into the shell like a turtle. You're unable to take risk. You build up scenarios in your mind of being rejected and how these events will transpire. And that's what causes you to withdraw. Or you'll explode with anger, fighting against this. Sometimes we can get very aggressive with exploding anger, chewing people up one side or the other. They are exploding with anger and hatred, and they're fighting bitterly against a supposed injustice, which is I'm rejected. They have a tendency to befriend weak people weaker than you. I did this. I definitely did this. I wanted to be the stronger one. That's where I felt safest. And I remember when my life started really unraveling, and I was getting to the end of myself. I'm a strong person. I can do a lot. And so it took a lot to get me to that place. And I remember moving into self-pity, nobody cares kind of thing. And I remember thinking, I don't have anybody here to help me, and I honestly need help. And God said, you set this up this way, Vicki. You had to be the stronger one in all things. And I knew it was God, and he really set me free and opened my eyes at that moment, because I realized that that's what the enemy did. It set it up that I really didn't have any help. But that was even a lie, because I really did have help. But I didn't have tons of help, but I had the help that I needed. But that was really revelatory for me, and I knew that I had to change my life when I got to a place where I needed help, and I realized that out of my own insecurities, I wouldn't let anybody stronger around me. And I've changed that today. I have some wonderful friends there today. Okay, so now in the workbook, I've taken this material and I put it in a form of questionnaire. So go into the workbook under rejection and start looking at answering these questions. And you'll begin to see the different ways that it's manifesting in your life and setting up your thinking. Okay, so now we're going to move into unloving. This is the next part 3. So I'll see you in part 3.